Another tale, another true, scary story. This was an encounter my brother had with what he truly believes to be a skinwalker, or maybe a wendigo. Whatever the creature was, all I know is that it terrified him. Late one evening, my brother and his best friend decided that they wanted to go camping. They wanted to go this same night and decided to bring along the two girls that they were both into at the time. It was a last-minute decision, but they had just enough time to get set up before the sun faded. After getting enough supplies for 2 days worth of camping, they quickly packed and left to go pick up the girls. After a couple of hours, they finally found a spot that they liked. It was about 30 feet or so from a creek. With less than an hour of sufficient light left, they speedily set up camp and their sleeping arrangements. Now that they were ready for the night, they quickly put together a fire pit and set up some chairs. Being typical teenagers, they all cracked open some beers and jovially talked about their recent weeks and the things that were going on in their lives. During mid-conversation, they began to hear branches cracking and twigs snapping over by the creek. Of course, this scared them a little bit, but both my brother and his best friend had pistols, so they didn't let it bother them too much. The movements stopped shortly after, and the mood eventually rose back up again. Time went on into the night, and then into the very early morning. Since they arrived, only a couple of hours had passed, but they decided to get an early start into the next day. That's when they headed back to their tents. If you ask me, I bet they were just eager to spend some alone time with the girls. After only about 15 minutes later, my brother heard his friend unzip his tent and walk over to his. "I'm not trying to interrupt anything, but I gotta use the bathroom," his friend said. My brother knew what he was implying and decided his bladder could use some relief as well. "Are you afraid a bear is gonna get you?" my brother asked as they approached the nearby creek. Not wanting the girls to hear their conversation, my brother's friend shrugged it off and began to relieve himself. Within a few seconds, it got eerily quiet. This made my brother's hair stand on end. The crackling of branches and movement started once again and sent the two into a hastily panic. A large figure, standing on all fours, appeared out of the darkness on the other side of the creek. This was the largest thing my brother has ever seen. His first thought about this large creature was that they had just woken up a huge black bear, which is a terrifying thought. Time slowed to a crawl as they watched this large thing slowly get closer. It was only about 10 feet away when it stood up. Still, while in fear and in shock, my brother noticed something extra terrifying about this creature. It had large, red, glowing eyes. It's as if they were red LEDs in its head. He could see that the legs on it bent backwards at a weird angle, and it stood about 9 feet tall. The shock was broken when he heard a large bang, and he turned to see his friend unloading his revolver at this monster. My brother immediately grabbed his gun by his side and followed suit. The creature was shot in the head at least twice, and 5 or 6 times in the body. With both pistols exhausted, the thing was still standing upright and simply acted like it was slightly annoyed. It let out a large, deafening wail that seemed somewhat human. And in a blink of an eye, It ran off along the creek faster than anything my brother has ever seen. Not knowing what to do or say, they both sprinted back to camp. The two girls were out of the tents and freaking out about the gunshots and the scream they heard. Not wanting to waste any time, they packed everything back up in record speed. The dark drive back home was quiet and somber. Paranoia and shock left them speechless, completely unsure what to really say. "What was that back there?" my brother's friend asked. "I have no idea. It was huge," replied my brother. One of the girls finally decided to speak up. "What was that loud scream we heard? And what was with all the gunshots?" After exchanging glances with one another, neither of them knew how to reply. The ride home was longer and much creepier after what they had experienced. Tired and shook up, they arrived at my brother's friend's house and finally passed out. The next morning, after dropping the girls off at their homes, my brother and his friend decided to take a ride back to that spot to try and find some answers. The creek seemed somehow slightly more off-putting than their first visit. After crossing to the other side where the creature was, they were surprised to find no blood. They found their shells that were fired off and some broken branches, but no tracks or blood. Some time went by, and both my brother and his friend had some additional weird things happen to them later on after that night camping. They both saw shadow figures creeping around after the sun went down. Paranoia also seemed to follow them around. I've heard this story a few times from my brother. Seeing the fear that was on his face when he recounted it shortly after it happened helps validate the truth in my eyes.